The 2010-2011 NBA regular season feels like it happened both in eternity and just a moment ago at the same time. And when I asked myself the question, what was the NBA like 12 years ago, all of these core memories from my childhood came rushing back. So get ready for nostalgia overload as we relive one of the greatest seasons of all time, the 2010-2011 NBA season. Before we even get to the NBA regular season, we have to start with this year's offseason. Fresh off a 4-2 loss in the Eastern Conference semifinals versus the Big Three Celtics, 25-year-old LeBron James has a big decision ahead of him. Will he re-sign with his hometown team that he's led to 60-plus wins in back-to-back seasons, but have failed to put a competitive supporting cast around him? Or would he sign with a big market team and go ship chasing? We would have our answer on July 8th, 2010, just one day after Chris Bosh, former Raptors superstar, announced he would be signing with the Miami Heat, joining Dwayne Wade in South Beach. In a live special that aired on ESPN called The Decision, LeBron James would announce 30 minutes into the program,
in this fall, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach and join the Miami Heat,
forming the second and newest Big Three in the NBA and officially launching LeBron James on his villain arc. I remember I was playing in a middle school baseball game when one of my friend's dads came and told us that LeBron had decided to go to Miami, which may have crushed us as LeBron fans, but not as much as it did the entire city of Cleveland. The whole thing was done in pretty poor taste, but it only made matters worse when the next day, as the new Big Three were getting announced, LeBron would say they
not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7.
The pressure was on LeBron to win in Miami and to do it immediately. We all know the NBA loves its storylines, so of course, on NBA opening night, they matched up the Celtics with the Heat, the original Big Three versus the new Big Three, and the Celtics would win 88-80. Miami would actually start slow this season, going 9-8 through its first 17 games, and we're learning through how to play with three superstars on the court. On December 2nd, LeBron would return to Cleveland, and when I say this was brutal, I mean it. The Heat would blow out the Cavs 118-90, and LeBron would finish with 38 points, but he was booed each time he touched the ball, and allegedly several fights broke out in the arena. As the season went on, the Heat would start to find their strides, including a dominant win over the Lakers on Christmas Day, winning 96-80. They'd finish the season strong, winning 58 games and getting the second seed in the Eastern Conference. While LeBron and Miami's Big Three dominated the storylines this season, so much else happened that we have to cover, starting with the #1 overall pick in that season's NBA draft, John Wall, a point guard out of the University of Kentucky, would have a really good rookie season for the Wizards, averaging 16.4 points per game, 8 assists, 4.6 rebounds, and 1.8 steals. His Wizards were terrible, but he looked so good doing it in those sick Gilbert Arenas Wizards unis before the rebrand. In almost any other year, he would have been Rookie of the Year, but unfortunately for John, that award would go to Blake Griffin, the 2009 #1 overall pick who missed his first season due to a stress fracture in his left knee. Blake absolutely dominated in his first technical season in the NBA, averaging 22.5 points per game, 12.1 rebounds, and 3.8 assists. And even though his numbers were impressive, what was even more impressive was his athleticism and his highlight dunks. He'd be selected to the All-Star team and become a part of an exclusive list of rookies that were All-Stars. Although the Clippers would only win 32 games this season, the building blocks were there, and a in-season trade the following year for superstar point guard Chris Paul would be all they'd need to become perennial threats in the Western Conference for years to come. 22-year-old third-year power forward Kevin Love would waste an incredible season on a terrible Minnesota Timberwolves team, but we have to talk about it. He would lead the league in rebounds with 15.2 per game. He would also have a double-double streak of 53 games this year, which was the longest the NBA had seen since Elvin Hayes had 55 in 1973. And he would score 31 points and 31 rebounds in a win over the New York Knicks on November 12th, becoming the first player in the NBA to have a 30-30 game since Moses Malone in 1982. On February 10th, 2011, Ray Allen would become the all-time leader in total three-pointers made, surpassing Reggie Miller's record of 2,560, which leads us right into NBA All-Star Weekend, the rookies versus sophomores game, which is now the Rising Stars game. consisted of some really fun faces. For the sophomores, you had Steph Curry, DeMar DeRozan, James Harden, Tyreek Evans, Drew Holiday, Brandon Jennings. And then for the rookies, you had Blake Griffin, DeMarcus Cousins, Eric Bledsoe, John Wall, Wesley Johnson. In the slam dunk contest, Blake Griffin would take home the title with a perfect 50 dunk, jumping over a car. I can't remember what the public perception was of that dunk at the time, but I remember me and my brothers thinking it was really stupid and completely overhyped. But that leads us into the NBA trade deadline, where two blockbuster trades would go down in this regular season. First, the Jazz would send superstar point guard Deron Williams to the Nets for Devin Harris, Derek Favors, and 2 first-round picks. And then Carmelo Anthony would force the Denver Nuggets' hand, trading him to the New York Knicks in a complicated trade that involved 12+ players. But the gist of it was that Carmelo and Chauncey Billups were going to the Knicks, and Denver was getting a first, 2 seconds, Wilson Chandler, Raymond Felton, and Danilo Gallinari in return. And that brings us to the meat of this video, which is the NBA playoffs and how each team finished the regular season. Starting with the Boston Celtics, their original big three, KG, Ray Allen, and Paul Pierce, were getting older, but they had a rising star point guard in Rajon Rondo, and were still a good team with an incredible defense that would finish as the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference. But the talk of the Eastern Conference was not the Celtics or the Heat. It was a different team, a team that would go 62-20, their best record since Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls, led by a 3rd-year, 22-year-old point guard Derrick Rose. This was the year Derrick Rose transformed into a superstar. He went from averaging 20.8, 6, and 3.8 on 26% from 3 while taking almost none a game, to averaging 25 points per game with 7.7 assists, 4.1 rebounds, and shooting 34% from 3 on 4.8 attempts per game. Derrick would dominate the MVP race and become officially the youngest MVP in NBA history at 22 years and 191 days old. And what's even crazier is during Bulls Media Day before the season began, he said to the reporters, "Why can't I be MVP?" Rounding out the rest of the Eastern Conference, we had the Orlando Magic, who would finish 52-30, led by Defensive Player of the Year and rebounding machine Dwight Howard, and fresh off a finals appearance from just 2 seasons ago. You had the Atlanta Hawks at 44-38, led by Joe Johnson, Josh Smith, Al Horford, Jamal Crawford. The 42-40 New York Knicks with 2 stars in Carmelo Anthony and Amari Stoudemire. And then we have the 7 and 8 seeds in the East that I want to mention for nostalgia purposes only. The Philadelphia 76ers with Andre Iguodala, Elton Brand, Drew Holiday, Thad Young, Lou Williams, and a 37-45 Indiana Pacers team who somehow made the playoffs, led by Danny Granger with rookie Paul George, who averaged 7.8 points per game. The last team I have to mention in the East is a team that did not make the playoffs. It's actually the team with the worst record in the league. You guessed it, the Cleveland Cavaliers, going 19-63. Cleveland fans were in absolute shambles. Not only did LeBron leave them in gut-wrenching fashion, but their team was terrible, and they had the worst losing streak of all time in this season with 26 losses in a row. In the Western Conference, we had 5 teams that won 50+ games. The San Antonio Spurs had the number 1 seed at 61-21. We all know what this Spurs team was. It was the same team that was good for a decade plus with Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili. But this wouldn't be their year. They would get upset in the first round by the number 8 seed Memphis Grizzlies. Led by Zach Randolph, Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, and OJ Mayo, they would defeat the Spurs in 6 games, and they didn't even have their best player, Rudy Gay, who was out with a shoulder injury. The Grizzlies would then face off versus the Oklahoma City Thunder, who defeated the Denver Nuggets in the opening round. This Thunder team was led by scoring champion Kevin Durant, who averaged 27.7 points per game this year, and they also had Russell Westbrook and James Harden. But the craziest part of it all was that all 3 of these guys were 22 years or younger. They had just had a 55-win season and were the 4 seed in the West. But the Grizzlies would give them hell and take them to 7 games, including Game 4 that went to 3 overtimes. In the end, the Thunder would prevail in 7 games, advancing to the Western Conference Finals. On the other side of the Western Conference, you had the Los Angeles Lakers, who were fresh off of 3 straight NBA Finals appearances, including back-to-back championships, led of course by Kobe Bryant, who was as good as ever, 6th Man of the Year Lamar Odom, Pau Gasol, and a 20-year-old rising star big man, Andrew Bynum. They would defeat the CP3-led New Orleans Hornets in 6 games and would face off against Dallas Mavericks in the Western Conference semis, who had just defeated LaMarcus Aldridge and the Portland Trail Blazers in the opening round. But before we get to Lakers-Mavs, I have to mention one of the most iconic games of the whole decade occurred in Game 4 of this series with the Blazers and the Mavericks. Down 23 points to start the fourth quarter, the Portland Trail Blazers would miraculously come back in an effort led by Brandon Roy, who would score 18 of his 24 points in that fourth quarter, winning 84-82. And not only was it an incredible comeback, but also if you understand the history of Brandon Roy and how incredible of a player he was just a few seasons before, and the devastating career-altering injuries he would sustain in those years, you'd understand this is a powerful moment where just for a glimpse, we were able to see vintage Brandon Roy again. The Mavs were a well-seasoned veteran team led by 32-year-old Dirk Nowitzki, 37-year-old Jason Kidd, 33-year-old Jason Terry, 32-year-old Sean Marion, and 30-year-old Caron Butler. In a shocking turn of events, they would sweep the Lakers in the Western Conference semis and move on to face the Oklahoma City Thunder in the Western Conference Finals. These two teams couldn't be any different. You have the old Mavericks versus the young Thunder. As exciting as this Thunder team's future was, now just wasn't their time. The Mavericks would handle them in 5 games, and we all know how great the Thunder would eventually be, but in this series, Dallas would take advantage of their youth and their inexperience. In the Eastern Conference, MVP Derrick Rose and the number 1 seed Bulls would waltz their way to the Eastern Conference Finals, defeating the Pacers and the Hawks handily after the Celtics swept the New York Knicks in the first round and Miami would defeat Philadelphia in 5 games. We had a super intriguing, fun matchup in the Eastern Conference semis, the Boston Celtics versus the Miami Heat, the old Big Three versus the new Big Three. The Celtics had beat the Heat 3 out of 4 times in the regular season, so everyone was expecting a hard-fought series, but we just didn't get that. Miami really did handle them in 5 games. The only thing I really want to mention from this series is that Rondo dislocated his elbow and still played, which I think is super badass. It set us up for what we thought would be a juggernaut of an Eastern Conference Finals, the supposed best team in the East versus the actual best team in the East. But Derrick Rose and the Bulls would have to wait because the Miami Heat would dismantle them in 5 games as well on their way to the finals. Neither of these conference finals series were all that interesting, as great as the storylines were leading up to it, but it did set us up for a fantastic storyline in the NBA Finals. The Miami Heat versus the Dallas Mavericks, a 2006 rematch of Dirk versus D Wade, but the most important storyline, could LeBron James win a championship? Was all of the hate he had taken moving to South Beach and the way that he did it going to be worth it? The Heat would get off to a fantastic start, winning Game 1 92-84. LeBron played fantastic, had 24 points, 9 and 5, and it seemed like this Heat team was just going to be too much for the older, savvy vets of the Mavericks. Game 2 seemed to bring us the exact same story after a Dwayne Wade corner 3 put the Heat up 15 points with 7:14 to go in the game. But instead, the Mavericks finished on a 22-5 run, including a game-winning layup from Dirk Nowitzki, and would win the game 95-93, evening the series. Miami would go up 2-1 in the series with an 88-86 win. And at this point, again, it looked like this series was Miami's to lose. But instead, the infamous LeBron James Game 4 occurs. In an 86-83 loss, LeBron James would play 45 minutes, go 3 for 11 from the floor, 2 for 4 from the free throw line, and finish the game with 8 points. He did have 9 boards and 7 assists, but you expect so much more from the supposed best player in the league, especially when Dwayne Wade had 32 and Chris Bosh had 24. And from there, things would snowball. Dallas would take Game 5 as well, going up 3-2 in the series, 112-103. And finally, they would close out the series, winning Game 6, 105-95, giving Dirk Nowitzki and Jason Kidd their elusive first ring in their careers, and leaving everyone wondering, how did a team of 32, 33, and 37-year-olds beat LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh? We're now sitting here in 2023. We know how LeBron's career has played out since then, but if you take a step back and you put yourself in 2011, there wasn't a lower point in LeBron James's basketball career. Everyone was wondering, did LeBron just sell his soul and his goodwill among the basketball world to never win a ring? And to make matters worse, He played awful according to his standards in this finals, averaging 17.8 points per game and getting outscored by Jason Terry. But it wasn't that he just didn't win a ring. It was about the decision he had made in the offseason and the hatred he had encountered because of it that put this immense pressure on him to win and to win now. As someone who likes LeBron, I'm glad to know the story doesn't end here, but it is the end of the story within this video, what the NBA looked like 12 years ago. If you enjoyed this video, check out this video I made on why 2016 was so legendary for basketball. You won't regret it, and as always, we'll see you on the hardwood.